Okay, so we are resurrecting a theme from quite a while ago, from about half a year ago or so. The idea is personalizing critical reasoning passages, which is a thing that you can do on surprisingly many of them. Basically, whenever you're dealing with the actions of people or businesses, or in fact, I should amend this so that it says people, animals, or businesses, because you can personalize animals too. It's definitely a thing. So basically, you just put yourself in the shoes of whoever is most strongly involved or most strongly affected in or by the situation, and that'll usually give you a whole slew of insights into it. I mean, it might seem like a stretch to personalize a situation as an animal, but in a lot of regards that's even easier, because generally limited horizon of stuff that you would care about as an animal. You know, eating, sleeping, reproducing, not dying, that's pretty much it. Whereas, of course, people have much more complex motivations. Okay, a couple of bookkeeping things as far as tools that you can use here. When we say give me a smiley face, that refers to the emotion icons that are underneath your name, which fortunately for you is not Ron. So it means not in the chat box. Please don't smiley in the chat box, just because there are enough people here that would become rather chaotic. And the other thing is, when there's multiple choice question, please use the multiple choice options that are underneath your name. You should see those now. You'll see A through E when you click on this lowercase letter A here, and that'll let you pick choices to the questions. Last but not least, I mean, we'll wait a little bit for people to answer the question, although, you know, decorum dictates that we eventually move on. But remember how this test works. Specifically, remember that there is no skipping things, there's no going back, there's no leaving things blank. You get one shot at each question, and you have to answer them in the order in which they are presented. So what that means is you should get used to doing that. The sooner the better. So when you are presented with questions in this study hall, again, I can't really force your hand, and if you just don't answer it for enough time, we will move on. However, the real test won't, so it is best if you follow that protocol sooner rather than later. So please answer all the questions, even if you have to guess. Also, just in terms of the pedagogical value of the session, I mean, the people who are going to learn the most are generally the people who answer last and are not sure, you know, because there's less value for the people who can just nail the problem and get them right without much of an issue. So keep that in mind. Okay. Other than that, pretty much ready to go here. Let's see. Let me do something real quick. All right. Okay, and last but not least, while the recording is on here, we need to show you the copyright notice. So let's just do that. These problems are from the GMAT Prep software, the free software. They are copyright GMAC. And with that copyright notice, they are okay to distribute freely. Okay, without further ado, let's jump into a problem. Remember, the deal is personalizing these things. So if you don't see the problem on the board, you should very shortly. The deal is that whenever the problem deals with the actions of people, that there should be ultimately one party whose actions are most deterministic, like whose actions have the biggest effect on the outcome. So you should think about who that is. and then place yourself in that person's spot. Remember where the multiple choice answers are located. The multiple choice answers are located underneath your name. Let me grab that graph. Yeah, this is where you get the multiple choice responses. Okay, I should be getting to the point where we have answers to these things. If you don't have something selected, you should probably select something soon. Okay, let's see. We got SOC, car E1, Mina 1, and then a user calling themselves Manhattan Prep. Just go ahead and pick something. Okay, let's talk about this again. If you don't have something selected, I can't really force your hand, although you should definitely pick things. So again, the deal today is that we're talking about passages that can specifically be personalized for optimum consideration here. So who in this problem is the most important player as far as how this outcome turns out? Notice that what we are interested in is this. So first we need to define this, because there are a few people saying that the producer of the car is the most important player here, but not really. But first what we need to do, and what you should do in all critical reasoning problems all the time ever, is we should get rid of what I like to call politician words. So what I mean by politician words is words that don't really have any immediate meaning. So there are quite a bit of those here. You know, like words that are general enough that you would have to get an explanation of them if you were not already familiar with the situation. Politician words, because politicians have this way of talking when they don't really want to say anything, they say stuff. Yeah, we will address the concerns raised by citizens about the local effects of the measure that was enacted in response to the recent events in our community. You know, the way that politicians talk, like that. I mean, those words don't really mean anything unless they already mean something in people's heads. So, and in fact, this is one of the prime problems that people have in critical reasoning, is they leave the politician words alone. So, it's a bad idea. We need to get those out of there, and then we'll understand exactly who is at the center of this. So the plan, I mean, we do have the word is planning too right here, so that is good. And then what constitutes success? The plan is to do that. What defines success? Yeah, success is defined by actually selling electric cars, is the point. I mean, it's not just making them attractive, because they can be attractive, and that doesn't really put, being attractive doesn't keep the lights on all by itself. But success is actually selling electric cars, right? Which is the ultimate point of making them attractive. So, right. So, in other words, whether people do or do not buy electric cars is what success is or isn't. So success means people actually buy these electric cars. Okay. So as soon as you figure that out, now we know who the key players are. I mean, who are the key players? Like who most directly determines whether this will succeed? Most directly. It's not the company. In fact, if you are the company, the very first thing you have to do is put yourself in the shoes of whom. Yeah, it's the people who buy stuff or don't. And I mean, this is pretty much the way it works with anything at all that is put on a market for sale. Whether it sells or not is ultimately up to the consumer. I mean, the only exception possibly being essentials of life in a country where those are sufficiently scarce. Like if you have a country where people are barely subsisting, then maybe they don't have a lot of power in the market when it comes to food staples and stuff. But like everything else at all, ever, is ultimately up to the consumer. So this is the thing. So you should make yourself the consumer here. And ultimately this will happen. Like if you first put yourself into the shoes of a sales executive or something at this company, then the first thought process you should have is, okay, what will the consumer do? So ultimately you're still thinking from the standpoint of the consumer. So, okay, that's you. So now there's a whole lot of, the reason why, the primary advantage of personalizing these things is that there are a lot of priorities that are stated or implied in the passage, and it's much easier to keep them all in mind if you imagine them as your own priorities. So the question is, what's your situation? Okay, well, you're interested in, you're shopping for a car, and you're looking at electric cars. Okay, what are some more things about you in particular? Like, what are you going to use your car for? Like, you are interested in buying an electric car to use for what? You're going to use it, yeah, what Wilson says. You are one of these people mentioned in the passage. So, you use your car to drive to work, mainly for driving to work. Okay. And what right now is getting in the way of you purchasing the car? Like, why do they need to have this green plan in the first place? Like, what's the problem? Okay, so the problem right now is you want to take road trips, and in the electric car you can't do that. So, okay. So now we know what this green plan is all about. The green plan is you get 3 days free rental, which, presumably that is a measure intended to let you go on weekend trips. So, I mean, there is an issue here about extended trips. So we'll get there in a sec. But the way the plan works is their plan is to let you have a free rental for every 1,000 miles at the lot. Actually, that's a lot of free rentals. So therefore, you get to take road trips. Okay, so notice that this mostly alleviates your concern, unless there is this 3-day limit here, so it all depends on what you mean by extended trips. So a thought that you would probably have if you put yourself into the shoes of the consumer here is, if in general, if this whole notion of extended trips are still 3 days or less, then your concern is addressed by this plan. But if extended trips can be more than 3 days, that's still a problem. So this is one issue that you might already have in mind before you examine answer choices and such. But, okay. And so there's two things that you all automatically want to do all the time when you read these things. The first is translate politician words. So, I mean, really you should simplify the entire passage as much as possible. But one of these things is immediately translate politician words, as we did up there. Okay. The other thing that you should always do is have as specific an idea as possible of what constitutes a correct answer before you look at the choices. Because otherwise the choices have this way of taking you for a ride. I mean, you've probably all been there, where you read a choice, it was totally not something you thought about at all, and then it made this like, well, if they say A, then maybe that means B, which might mean C, which might mean D. Okay, well, I guess D is the argument, right? That's not a good way to do this. I mean, you have standards in mind already before you go to the choices. So with that in mind, let's not look at the choices yet. What constitutes a correct answer in this problem? You weaken the proposal, that's still politician words, though. That's still very distant from reality. I mean, you want to be more specific than that, if you can. Like, what specifically makes a correct answer here? I mean, what does weaken the proposal mean? Remember, you are the person thinking about buying this car. So, threatens a sales, and there's two ways that could happen, right? The first is actually this issue that we raised already, which is it could be a reason why the plan doesn't address your concern. And there's really only one of those, so which would be if you take trips that are longer than 3 days, then that's there. Or maybe, because this is an electric car, right, which doesn't use gas. So maybe the car rentals, like if something's wrong with the rental, like if it consumes too much gas for you to be able to go on these trips, for instance. So in other words, something wrong with the rental situation would be one way to have a correct answer here. So either the 3 days is not long enough or something is bad about the vehicle they let you rent. So if you look through these choices, though, that doesn't happen. So there's actually no mention at all of the rental situation. So then what we're left with is it's got to be something else that's compensating for that. So it's going to be a new issue raised by the plan. Because the only issue before was I want to take road trips, and now we have addressed that. So it's got to be a totally new issue raised by the plan that discourages you from buying the electric car. It's what we've got to have. So then we take this to the choices, and we see what they say. So yeah, so price, for instance, just by pure common sense, is definitely an issue. Like they don't have to tell you that consumers are price sensitive because we know that they are. But yeah, okay. So A says that many cars used for commercial purposes are not needed for trips. This is great, but you do not care at all because this is not you. I mean, first of all, this is not you. I mean, you are not driving this car for your business. So commuting is not commercial purposes. And also, the whole need for extended trips is clearly important to you. So this is definitely not you either. Because in fact, the need for extended trips is pretty much the only reason why you are not buying this car right now. So basically, A describes people who are not you. So you don't care. And when you personalize the situation, it's much easier to see that A is. In fact, A is pretty much people whose priorities are exactly the opposite of yours. It's like, okay, some of those people exist, but whatever. Okay, choice B. Choice B has a lot of words. What is the point of it? The point is that the cost of the car will go up. Now notice the way that you read this, like you don't really even care about the words that follow because that's not the point. I mean, it doesn't matter why the cost of the car is going up. It just is. And if you're the consumer, that's going to have the same effect on you regardless of why. So the part of B that actually matters here is that the manufacturer is going to have to pay a lot more. And then it's going to trickle down to the consumer. There's a couple of words here that you should pay attention to because they have constant meanings of which you should be aware. Cost and price are those words. I mean, just make sure that you know what these are. Cost is not what the consumer pays. Costs are, revenues versus costs incurred by the manufacturer. And they just to make sure that that's clear, they actually say cost to the producer just so there is no ambiguity there. But then price refers to selling price on the market. So just make sure that you know when they use the word price here, that is not a cost incurred by manufacturers. Price is what the car costs on the market. So last but not least, notice what they're doing with adjectives here. And I guess adverbs. Because this is definitely a thing that you want to learn to pay attention to. Those purple things. Take note of them. Because, okay, one thing they do a lot in critical reasoning problems is they really go out of their way to make sure that they do not devolve into quant problems. Because there's a whole other half of the test dedicated to quant problems. So the last thing they really want here is more quant problems masquerading as critical reasoning problems. So what they do instead is they give you these qualifiers or these descriptors or these intensifiers, you might call them, that these kinds of words are intended to communicate to you that these things are big enough to overcome something else. Like if they use the word considerably here, it's not random. Like considerably means, I mean, it's going to be heavily dependent on context. But when they say considerably, that means enough to overcome some other factor. So, and then they mentioned that it is already high. They also mentioned that for a reason. So high price what that means by common sense is that it's already high enough to discourage you. So what do we get from choice B? We get these things are already expensive enough to put you off. Price is already off-putting. And now it's much higher. That is definitely a factor that works against you by cost. And the most important take-home point you might get from this is the way that they use these kinds of words as substitutes for numerical things. Because otherwise, they would need a lot of numbers. Like if they wanted to do this quantitatively, they would actually have to define things like your threshold cost and how much extra price you would be willing to absorb. Whereas these kinds of descriptors are meant to do that just in a more common sense kind of way. What's the point of choice C? Can anybody simplify choice C for me? Explain it to a 9-year-old. Yeah, okay. So one thing you might want to do, because choice C is a sentence with a lot of words and not very much punctuation, in fact, none. So if you are me, this is not an easy sentence to process. So what you might want to do is look at the core of the sentence the way that you would in sentence correction or something, because the core of the sentence is going to communicate the main point. Like same thing with B, like because blah, 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 blah is not the core of the sentence. The core of B is the cost would add considerably to the price. That. So the core of sentence C is the time can easily be fitted into regular patterns. So then you can look at the rest of the words and see what they're talking about, which is nothing is really going to change. Like the deal here is that there's this potential deal breaker, which is, you know, how long does it take to fill up a gasoline-powered car at a gas station? Like 30 seconds to a minute. So if it suddenly takes hours to charge your car, then this could actually be a major disruption to your life. So it's not a minor issue. It's definitely not. Like if you have a long time that is suddenly being inserted that is necessary, that could be a huge disruption in somebody's life. But what this does is it actually works against that. Like this says, this takes a potential objection away. So it definitely doesn't work against you buying the car. Like this takes away something that may have been keeping you from buying the car. So, and also there's no need to quibble over whether this is like a little strengthened or not, because the point is it clearly doesn't weaken the prospects, and that's all you care about. So, because we don't really know. I mean, if you have all the free time in the world, then maybe this doesn't matter to you anyway, but if you are very busy, then maybe it does. So it's like it might strengthen, it might do nothing, but ultimately we don't care, because that's not the issue. The issue is, does it discourage you? The answer to that is very clearly, no, it does not. In fact, it takes away something that could have discouraged you. Okay, core of sentence D. Again, although blah, 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 blah is not part of core, so ultimately we don't care. Generating the electricity can burn in the environment. We don't know whether this is a concern at all. So this has an unknown effect. I mean, there are two things that we would have to know to be able to judge this. I mean, the first is, do you even care? And there's no indication that you do. And unlike price, this is not a factor just by common sense default. But on top of that, I mean, it's not generate electricity versus nothing. I mean, we would also have to know the answer to how does this compare to the environmental effect of gasoline, which could be even greater. So even if this were a concern, we still wouldn't know how it stacks up against, because you have to drive something. Yeah, it's not like a choice between this burden and nothing. So we don't know. It's just a big giant question mark. And then E is the same kind of issue as A. It's just not you again. So because you are a consumer who wants to commute for the most part. So as soon as you see this, you're like, I don't care. It's not me. It's irrelevant to this issue. Not you. Any questions about this problem other than what has already been put in the box? All right, let's do another one. How about that one? Remember, you should, and you should do this in general whenever it's about people doing things or not doing things. You should think, whose decisions does this turn on? Okay, so there are still some non-responses, but here this problem appears to be genuinely confounding a lot of people, because here are our results so far. It's almost a random selection. So let's at least get you off on the right foot here. Notice the question. Specifically what the question is asking you to do. See, this is one of those things that's dangerous about just being cavalier with categories of questions. You know, like, I'm going to pretend that all weekend questions are the same. Well, they're not, though, because notice what the words say here. I mean, these words don't say weaken the argument. They say this. Does anybody know what the difference is? Like, this question is much more specific than what would weaken the argument. How's that? Probably not going to be totally illogical. If it were, then sure. But, you know, it's not going to be a nonsense conclusion. So it does ask for the flaw in the reasoning, but that seems to just be a restatement of the words that are already on the board. In terms of, okay, like, let's say that let's say that this doesn't happen, but the reason why it doesn't happen is that crime on the buses like spikes up and people get freaked out and they go back to driving their cars. would that weaken this argument overall? Yeah, it would, because it would work against people using the bus. But is that a way in which the mayor's reasoning is flawed? No, it wouldn't be. Do you guys see the difference? In other words, if you brought up some totally separate point that actually worked against this, it could still weaken the argument, but it wouldn't be a way in which the reasoning itself is flawed. So this is a more narrow question than usual, because this needs to be something with the actual connections made by the mayor that has to be wrong. So as opposed to it's not going to be some totally new thing. So for example, like this is not flawed reasoning. This would not be a correct answer to a similar question here, because the reasoning is actually perfectly sound. You know, like, okay, they want to take road trips, let's give them a way to take road trips. The problem here is that some new issue crops up. Okay, now suddenly the car is out of their price range. So that doesn't indicate a problem with the initial reasoning. It just indicates another issue that weakens the ultimate result. So here, it's not going to be a totally new issue, is the point. So not a new factor. Instead, something has to be wrong with what the mayor actually mentions. That's going to narrow things considerably, because you suddenly, all other potential issues with the bus system other than cost are non-issues, because cost is the only thing that the mayor takes into account. So keep that in mind and try this again. Just bear in mind that the mayor's reasoning is based specifically on cost factors. Therefore, something has to be wrong with the way the mayor is thinking about cost factors. Keep that in mind. And A, B, C, D, E here. Okay, let's discuss. Someone mentions taking a cab in the sidebar, but that wouldn't really affect anything, because a cab is a car, and your own car is also a car. So there would be no, either way, there would be no effect on congestion. I mean, it's not like a cab. Cabs are in traffic too. So, but ultimately, again, we have to think about it in terms of this. Because if someone switches from their car to a cab, then there will be zero effect on congestion from that. So that's not a thing that needs to be considered, because it will have no effect either way. Because the fact that they are private vehicles is not what's really the point. What's really the point is that they are traffic. So, but okay. Whose decisions does this revolve around most directly? They're being more explicit about this than usual. I mean, they actually mentioned this in there. Whose decisions? The people who, which people? The people who right now are driving their own cars into the city from outside. Okay. You are someone who commutes into the city in your own car. Okay, So, and then let's talk about what the mayor's actual reasoning is, because again, we can't. It's not one of those things where we can raise a currently irrelevant issue. It's not. It's not like that. We have to. It has to be something about the mayor's reasoning that is directly wrong with it. So the mayor says, we're going to impose a $5 fee on you like at the entrance to the city or something like that. So this fee is, the bus fare is less than $5. And so that difference will convince you to switch to the bus. This is the mayor's reasoning. So there are two steps. There's that step, and then there's that step. I mean, the first step would be a matter of fact. I mean, if the bus fare is less than $5, then it is. Okay. On the other hand, and if you're personalizing this adequately, you should definitely think about this. You should be thinking about, that's a really small difference. I mean, because it's not even $5 that you'd be saving. You'd be saving $5 minus the cost of bus fare. So you might only be saving $1 or $2 at the end. So basically, the reasoning is flawed if this difference will not actually convince you to change your behavior. So it has to be something along those lines. I mean, you need an answer choice that basically says, nope, this is not going to do it. This is not going to change what you do. You're just like, that's not going to affect anything. Okay. Well, so choice A, which basically no one picked, this definitely is not a problem. I mean, if anything, hold on just a second. Okay, sorry about that. The choice A, if anything, it would go the way we don't want to go here, because if the cost of taking a car into the city gets even higher, then if anything, that plays into the hands of the mayor. But what's more important about A is that it doesn't affect the mayor's reasoning at all. I mean, it might be something that affects the overall situation, but this has nothing to do with the mayor's reasoning, which is the cost of the bus versus $5. And on top of that, it's going the wrong way. It's actually working against taking the car. I mean, what does B mean for you personally? This is where if you are the person taking the car into the city, you will immediately realize the priorities that choice B reflects. Like, what does this mean? Yeah, this means if you are one of these people, then for the most part, you're totally fine with paying more money already. So, because yeah, you're already paying something that is more than $5. So, in other words, this means that you are totally willing to accept an increased cost in order to drive. So, in other words, this is very specifically saying that you are really not that cost sensitive when it comes to this. So, therefore, this difference will not convince you, because if it did, it would already convince you. Like if you would be affected by $5 versus the toll, then you would already be taking a bus. So this is the answer we want, because it totally defeats the idea that is actually in the mayor's reasoning, which is that this fare is actually going to trigger a behavior change on your car. C, not very, I mean, one or two people pick C, but C is irrelevant here because only the people who are actually you. That's why you got to personalize it. I mean, the question is about whether you will change your behavior, you who are a commuter who drives into the city in a car. C is just talking about a bunch of people who are not you, so you don't care. D, again, so they do this a lot with wrong answer choices. The choice D is just saying not everybody will do this, and that's fine. We don't need everybody to do it. So, I mean, this is saying is that there's going to be some contingent of people who will resolutely and stubbornly sit in the traffic. But that's the case with basically every behavioral change. I mean, same sort of thing here, right? Choice D, the analogy of that choice in this problem would be like saying there are going to be people who just won't buy an electric car, period, end of story. That's fine. I mean, the plan doesn't depend on everyone in the world suddenly buying an electric car. So same sort of thing here. I mean, choice D, and there's not a lot of patterns in critical reasoning, but this is a type of wrong answer that you should very specifically be alert to, which is basically all this is saying is that not everyone will react. Well, that's fine. This is perfectly acceptable. All the mayor needs is some people, not everyone. And then we have E, which again is talking about people who are not you. So this is also irrelevant. Because again, the problem is these people are not part of the problem in the first place. I mean, they are already in the city. So, I mean, they might cause traffic within the town, but the traffic that we're trying to alleviate here is due to people bringing in cars from outside the city. So, it's not you. So you don't care. And we want B. Now again, I know I'm kind of hammering this point home sort of excessively, but just to make sure that you guys understand the difference between this question and just asking you to weaken the argument. Let's say I gave you something like choice F, which is the fee would have to be collected at toll booths, which would, at toll booths, that would require motorists to stop, thus worsening the traffic problem. Okay, now see, this is the distinction between just weaken the argument. Like, does this weaken the mayor's conclusion? Yes, it does. Because ultimately the mayor is like, this will alleviate traffic. But now we're showing for a reason that the mayor did not even sort of think about, that it's going to create a new problem. So is this a flaw in the mayor's actual reasoning? No, it is not. So just make sure that you notice the difference. I mean, they're not going to ask you this and give you a wrong answer like this, because the wrong answers in these problems are always totally wrong. So it's not just going to be for a reason that is sort of subtle. But the reason why it's useful to know this is that you can narrow your search. So like in this problem, you know that you don't even have to think about outside factors. Because the words in the question are these, okay, the mayor is talking about cost, therefore there's something has to be actually wrong with the cost factors. And that's all that we care about. As opposed to this problem and most weekend problems, where you actually have to think about absolutely anything else that could affect the purchasing decisions. So that's the only real value there. Because again, I mean, they're not going to give you wrong answers like F. But in terms of predicting, you can cast a narrower net, is really the point. Okay. Let's look at another one. How about this? And don't forget where your multiple choices are found. Here. Sorry if the page changed on you there for a moment. That was not on purpose. Okay. Let's discuss whose decisions are the center of the universe here. Yeah, the parents of kids, because kids don't go out and get flu shots or flu vaccines. So ultimately, whether this happens is up to the parents. So that's the deal. So you have a kid. At least you have at least one kid. And so therefore this issue is on the table for you. So the reasoning is, therefore, I mean, do you care at all about they have been used primarily by older adults? Do you directly care that they are used by older adults? No, you don't. But, what does this mean for you? Because again, personal perspective here is super important. Then you can realize what you can realize right away what the issues are. It means that most people like you are not using these. That's what that means. Because as you find out later in the passage, like kids are actually more likely to get the flu than older adults. So this is kind of a weird fact. I mean, you would expect it to be used more by kids if kids are the primary vectors of the flu. So again, you read it from the point of view of the parent here, you will immediately realize the significance of that statement. The significance of that statement is not that older adults are using it. No one cares. The significance of that blue statement is right now, most people like you are not giving the vaccine to their kids. That's the significance of that statement. So you can, I mean, why not? And there are multiple possibilities, but a couple should spring to mind. The first is because it's an injection, or maybe it's too expensive, or too inconvenient, or anything like that. So, but you should at least get to thinking about why this bizarre behavior is happening right now. So you should anticipate that this is going to be an issue. Okay. So right now that's not happening. And so if they say, now there's a nasal spray, so they say, if you put it on the market, then it will reduce the spread of influenza. Now, of course, it doesn't do that all by itself. So the implied reasoning is that more people like you will use it. And so, therefore, it'll reduce the spread of the disease. Okay. Well, so there are two steps of the reasoning here that you might need to bolster, but you don't really need to support this step. I mean, if this step right here, if more people like you give this vaccine to your kids, then the spread of the disease will definitely go down. So this is pretty solid already. So as far as strengthening, you should be focusing on the other part of the argument, which is this. This could actually stand to be strengthened. And if this is true, then it must have something to do with why you are not doing it right now. So you can actually predict pretty specifically what this is going to be. And it has to be a reason why you are not using the current vaccine. And it has to be something that is rectified by the new one. That's a super specific thing, right? So it's pretty much going to be one of these, right? One of these is going to be resolved. So A says if you get both of them, then you're still fine, but that's not the problem because this only is a factor for people who are not currently vaccinating their kids. So A is not relevant to you because you right now are someone who isn't using the injectable one. B uses the same mechanism. That's great, but that doesn't have anything to do with why you are not using the old one and or why you will use the new one. And our blanket statement right now, anything that they have in common is automatically the wrong answer here because the entire point of this whole thing is that they are not the same. And that the way they are different is actually something that's going to make you go out and get the new one. C says cheap. So that's the wrong way. I mean, if it was too expensive, sure. And on top of that, this is for people who are not you. So wrong way and irrelevant. So definitely a loser. D says that of these older adults, not very many of them are getting it from kids. So this is two kinds of bad. First kind of bad is that it's not relevant any more than any of the other ones are, because it's still not anything to do with your reluctance. But on top of that, this shows you that even if you did adopt this new vaccine, then it would actually not affect the spread of the disease as much as you had hoped. So not only is it irrelevant off the top, but moreover, it actually shows that this step is even less likely. So that's not good. And then we have choice E, which means that right now you are spooked by the idea of giving your kid a shot. So this is the reason why you are not using the current vaccine, because you don't want to give your kid a shot. And that is clearly rectified by the new vaccine, which is not a shot. So there you have it. Again, note how wrong the wrong answers are. I mean, there will never be a wrong answer that is like, well, it's in the right direction, but less than the correct answer. Isn't that how this works? And when you review these, you want to make sure that you're on board with that. Like, if you need to strengthen an argument, then all of the wrong answers will either be irrelevant or will work against the argument to whatever degree. It really is. If you're looking for black, then the wrong answers will be white, 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 and white. Important realization to make. Okay. Any questions about this one, feel free to put in the chat box. And how about do at least one more? Let's see here. How about this one? Right here. When you look at this, don't forget the theme of today's lesson in general, which is personalizing. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here that looks highly technical, but don't forget to personalize the problem. Difficulty level is not a thing that could possibly benefit you in any way to think about. So there is zero potential benefit of considering that. Let's help you guys get on a good foot here, because apparently there are lots of people picking different answers. The first is make sure you know what you're doing. Remember, with assumptions, what is perhaps the most reliable way to tackle those is with the method of negation, which is you make it false and you see how that affects the argument. So remember, if you make an assumption false, the argument should be totally destroyed. And, all right, let's talk about personalizing it. I mean, whose point of view should you be thinking about this from? Probably not customers in general. I mean, what is the plan supposed to do? The plan is supposed to prevent counterfeiting. So whose decision is that ultimately? Whether crime will be prevented depends on whose actions. Most directly. Not the bank. I mean, nah. It's the criminals. I mean, the bank is taking action to try to stop the criminals from doing something. But of course, any sort of crime always comes down to the criminals, like the people who actually commit the crime or don't. So this is the perspective that you should consider this from. Because the manufacturers are not the center of this. I mean, they're the ones trying to stop counterfeiters from doing something. But ultimately, again, like if you build a fence to keep burglars off your property, then ultimately the burglar is still the center of that. I mean, it's not do you or do you not do something. It's will the burglar decide not to make the effort. So any crime, whether or not the crime actually takes place, is ultimately up to the person who's thinking about doing it. So you are someone who wants to make counterfeit checks. Because if you put yourself in the shoes of the manufacturer, then you're still going to have to think about these people. Because these are the people against whom you are trying to defend. So ultimately, it still comes down to this. In the same way that if you're trying to protect your home from a burglar, you have to be like, okay, I'm a burglar. What appeals to me? And then you have to do the opposite. So it's just whoever's point of view. I mean, whether or not you have a criminal mind is irrelevant because you can still put yourself in those shoes. So, take a little bit to... Yeah, if you're making software, again, it depends what the question is, of course. If the question is, will the software sell, then that's ultimately, like anything else that sells or doesn't sell, is up to the buyers. There are lots, software is not a one-sided thing. I mean, there are lots of things that you could potentially consider, some of which would revolve around the developers, some of which would revolve around the testers, some of which would be end user issues. You would have to, that's why you have to get rid of the politician words, because you don't know, really, until those are gone. Okay, so you will make counterfeit checks. Right now, how does this work? Like, how can you do this right now if you want to? Yeah, you have a really good scanner and a really good printer. And so you can do it. So by using a very good scanner and a very good printer, you can counterfeit the checks that are out there right now. Okay, now notice, I mean, I actually don't understand why this answer choice is as appealing as it is, because a lot of people picked it. But you know what you don't use to do this? Your eyes. So this is immediately irrelevant. I mean, it doesn't make any difference whether you can see the security feature, because your eyes are not used to counterfeit checks. So, I mean, maybe it's lack of personalizing problem, but if you realize that it's really an issue of will people counterfeit the checks, then you know right away that C is irrelevant, because you don't have to be able to see these things. It matters whether your scanner can see these things, quote unquote. That's actually the core of the problem, but not your eyes. So C's gone. Okay, right now you can do that. What's their plan to stop you? What's going to be on these new checks? The new checks will have dots too small for what? Aha, they're too small for the copiers, or actually it's the scanner that's the issue, it's not the printer. It's too small for the scanners that you have right now. I mean, this should actually make you think immediately about the key issue here. What should you be thinking about? Especially when it comes to tech, of all things. I mean, just kind of like saying, oh, this program is too big for you to run on the computer, the laptop that you have now. I mean, what thought should immediately spring to mind? Yeah, like these things always get better. I mean, you know, the tech is, just think about the tech of like 5 years ago or 10 years ago even. That wasn't even that long ago. You know, and my laptop's almost 5 years old, and it would be a joke compared to current ones. So, yeah, I mean, if you are the person doing this, you'll be like, dude, all we have to do is just make better scanners. Like, this will be actually almost obvious if you have that point of view. Because right now, this argument is actually assuming that scanner technology will just not evolve at all. Well, geez. So, what about, like, what if scanners keep pace? Okay, that's what you should be thinking about. And this is a strong enough objection that you should have it in mind when you go into choices. Because this is the only thing stopping you, by the way, is the equipment. So not only is this a very obvious objection if you personalize the problem, but it's also the only real objection. It's the only thing that's really, it's the only defense these things have, and they don't have other defenses. So, okay, I mean, if you look at that, if you look for this issue, you'll find it as choice E. It's there. There's a lot of words in choice E, but basically it says that the scanners are not going to get better at recognizing small things. If you do the negation method, then E says that the smallest things that your scanner can reproduce will get smaller in the near future, i.e. the technology will get better. If that's true, then this argument is trash. As far as the other issues, if you personalize this, you can see why it doesn't matter. I mean, the percentage of counterfeit checks has remained the same. That doesn't matter. That has nothing to do with deterring behavior. This is the amount of money, but that's not the point. The point is whether you can do it at all. C, we already talked about. You don't use your eyes to do this, so whether your eyes are good enough is irrelevant. And also, cost is not considered here as an issue, because not the point. The point is, can it be done? If there were a significant cost incurred by, and this is another reason why you should personalize these things, because I mean, if it cost you suddenly way more, Like if there was a new scanner that could do this, but it was so expensive that it wasn't even worth it to counterfeit things anymore, then that would be a factor. But this is cost incurred by the banks and the corporations. In other words, everyone who is not you. So this is not relevant. And that's it. So you're going to see the value of personalizing these things because the priorities will just become immediately apparent. And so will the factors. Like no one mentioned this, but if you had any involvement in this situation whatsoever, you will definitely think about it. So basically what you should do whenever you encounter a critical reasoning problem is just first think, is this something I can personalize? It won't always be. I mean, if it's like, you know, did these proteins that came from Mars on a meteorite have the right mix of amino acids to create life? Okay, you can't really personalize that. In that kind of situation, you're more stuck with like really nerdy conversations. But if you can personalize, you absolutely should. And that's it. Let's close up the shop here. As always, thank you for attending. And we will reconvene in 2 weeks, I believe at the same time. And that'll be that. All right. Good afternoon, good evening, good night, good morning, good luck.